The Bible has a lot of strange locations thrown at us in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, Meshech, Tubal, Beth-Togarmah, Mos Eisley, Alderaan, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You need a time machine to know where all these places are. In fact, you need a spaceship too, because some of them only exist in a galaxy far, far away. Since we don't have time travel technology all figured out yet, we're going to have to rely on history to tell us where all these places are. But why is knowing all these names important in the first place? Well, it's because these are the nations or peoples who were prophesied to come against Israel in an epic end-time battle of the last days, the famous prophecy of Gog and Magog. And this prophecy's fulfillment may be close, and it may not. That's why we have to understand what nations that we should be watching closely. Once we've established who is who in this biblical drama, we'll know how to see them coming into alignment with this prophecy, and perhaps be able to track how close we are to Gog and Magog's battle playing out. I'll teach you the signs that we're looking for today on the Cross References podcast. Welcome to the Book of Ezekiel, a cross-references Bible study where we learn how every small piece of the Bible tells one big story and how they all connect to the cross and Christ. My name is Luke Taylor, and I'm a newspaper guy. When I was in college, I actually worked for 4 years on the college paper. I got a degree in journalism and public relations, and I even wrote for some area newspapers and magazines as a young adult before my life kind of took a turn into church ministry later on. But when I was in journalism classes, they taught us that whenever you write a news article, you need to figure out the who, the what, the when, the why, and the where. And you need to answer all those questions as you're getting the information to write your story. And so that's also the approach that I've undertaken with Ezekiel 38 and 39. These are the famous chapters of the battles of Gog and Magog. And I call them famous because if anyone knows anything about the book of Ezekiel, it's usually chapter 38 right here. But there's a lot of opinions out there about how this Gog and Magog fight is going to play out. And I want to take all of this one piece at a time and really go in depth on understanding the scenario that Ezekiel is prophesying. So last week, I talked about the who. Who is Gog? I tried to answer that question last week, and if you didn't listen, I'm not going to spoil it here. You'll have to go back and listen if you missed it. But last week was the who, and this week we're going to talk about the where. What are all these nations who are involved in this alliance who team up to attack Israel? And I'll restart the chapter from the beginning because we're really not that far into it. Let's just recap what the context here is. Ezekiel 38, verses 1 through 3. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So as I said on the last episode, there are some good and some not so good reasons that you could see Russia as Magog. The good reasons are based on the words of Josephus. There's others who believe that Gog is just the leader of Turkey. One of the reasons is that Meshech and Tubal are found in Turkey. And so no matter whether Russia is part of this end-time alliance or not, we can definitely say Turkey is going to be a player in it. And who else is in it? Well, verse 38. And I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws, and I will bring you out, and all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor, a great host, all of them with buckler and shield, wielding swords. Verse 5, Persia, Cush, and Put are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Verse 6, Gomer and all his hordes, Beth-Togarmah from the uttermost parts of the north with all his hordes, many peoples are with you. And so here we are again, back to all these names. Chuck Missler likes to say the reason these names are so unfamiliar to us is because we keep changing them. Constantinople, that was changed to Istanbul. Cape Canaveral is now Cape Kennedy. By the way, Mount McKinley in Alaska is now Mount Denali. I just relearned that earlier this year. I'm like, when did all this happen? They keep pulling the rug out from under us. Hannah Montana is Miley Cyrus. Washington Redskins, Aunt Jemima, Bruce Jenner. Just leave the names alone, people. Anyway, let's just go through these one at a time. Not all the ones I just listed there, but the ones that are in Ezekiel 38. So Persia, this is the one that's easiest to translate to modern times. This would be the nation of Iran. And Iran is significant for being part of this prophecy for several reasons. Recall that this prophecy was given 2,608 years ago. And not only has this people group of Persia lingered on for thousands of years, it is now one of the most geopolitically significant nations in the world. One, Iran is a major energy producer with a huge stock of oil and gas. Two, Iran has nuclear ambitions. You probably remember former President Obama's famous Iran nuclear deal of 2015. That was the deal that President Trump promptly shredded whenever he took office in 2017. If Obama's Iran nuclear deal had been allowed to stand, Iran would be allowed to start developing nuclear weapons in 2025. That would be just 1 year away from that would be next year. That would be just a few months away. And Iran would be allowed to start developing nuclear weapons. That was what was so terrible about the Iran nuclear deal from back then, why so many people were against it, why Congress did not pass it, and it was signed basically as a treaty that was really, it was not an act of Congress, so it was not a binding treaty anyway. That's why it was such an unpopular deal, because you just go 10 years down the road and it's not that far away. Here we are just a year from it now. And Iran would have been allowed to develop nuclear weapons. They would have had that freedom. So that was not a good deal long term. Iran desperately does want to start building nuclear weapons, though. And so number three, we don't want them to do that because Iran is the largest state supporter of terrorism in the world. Number four, it has significant social unrest and activism with a pretty decently minded civilian population that's ruled by an evil totalitarian government. I was, on a side note, I was just kind of sad to see in the latest Lord of the Rings, that Rings of Power series that they put on Amazon, the character Bronwyn did not return in the new season. That is because her actress is Iranian, and she had returned back home between seasons to protest the government, and she kind of got caught up in that, so she didn't come back for the show in season 2. They have a pretty, from what I hear, because I'm not Iranian, but just from what I hear from people who are more familiar with that region, the Iranian people are not bad people. It's the government that's the problem over there. And that's why you see a lot of these actual social unrest in response to these protests and stuff in response to what their government does. Number 5, Iran is very rich, probably the most influential Muslim nation toward the other Muslim nations in the Middle East because of their wealth and power. And then number 6, and perhaps most important to this Ezekiel 38 prophecy, Iran hates Israel with a fiery passion. If you don't know that, you just haven't been watching the news lately, because this has been in the news a lot just the past few weeks. Iran and Israel have been trading some attacks. Iran launched hundreds of ballistic missiles, and they pummeled Israel in what I would consider an act of war. Because if you think about it, if any nation had launched a few hundred missiles into the United States of America with the intent of killing our citizens, there's no doubt that we'd be at war with that nation. We'd be responding in kind. But when this kind of thing happens to Israel, they have to be so careful about how they respond, because they don't have a lot of support from other nations if they go into some kind of conflict. Even if it's in self-defense, they will not get support from a lot of nations of the world. So Israel has to be really careful and pick their battles, and they have to tolerate so much abuse that, we Americans would never put up with. And so, that's why we say pray for Israel. Iran is pretty clear that it has intentions to wipe Israel off the map, as evidenced by its its presidents, who keep saying that they want to, quote, wipe Israel off the map. And so conditions are ripe for Iran. If the leader of Turkey or the leader of Russia came to them and said, hey, would you like to help us out in wiping Israel totally off the map? Iran would say, totally. We've been wanting to do that for years. We just can't get it done. Of course, we're going to help you destroy Israel. They would do it for free. Iran would be more than happy to fulfill this prophecy given by Ezekiel 2,608 years ago. The next nation mentioned is Cush. Verse 5 again. Persia, Cush, and Put are with them, all of them with shield, and helmet. Cush is first mentioned in the Bible in the table of nations in Genesis 10, verse 6. The sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Now, as I said in the previous episode, if you heard that, Ham went toward Africa. Ham's sons settled in Africa. Cush was a region that today would be known as Sudan or Ethiopia. It's a little ambiguous or debatable which nation that this could be talking about. It could be talking about both even. But Cush is this area just south of Egypt. In the Septuagint, which I mentioned, I think in the previous episode also, it helped us in identifying who Gog is and Magog and all that. The Septuagint translates Cush literally as Ethiopia. It's just Ethiopia with an A on the front of it. And so that tells us that's what the translators of Jesus' day understood Cush to be. However, the Cushites were living at that time in what is called Sudan in modern times. So the Cushites, or the Ethiopians, they migrated from that area to where the country of Ethiopia is today. So it's a little ambiguous whether Cush could be understood as Sudan or as Ethiopia in modern times. Kind of like last week's episode, and I talked about how Magog was the territory of the Scythians, and they migrated into what is known as Russia today. That's why we popularly call Magog, we associate it with Russia. Ethiopia and Sudan are nations that we might just want to keep our eye on both of those nations as we look for alignment with Iran or Turkey or Russia and seeing this prophecy play out. Okay, as I've said this before, Cross References is not a geopolitical expert. I don't know what the foreign policy of Ethiopia is in relation to Russia. So I asked ChatGPT, because that's been a little helpful to me in getting some of this research done. ChatGPT told me this. It said Ethiopia and Russia are on friendly terms, more so militarily, not necessarily economically. I also asked ChatGPT about Sudan and Russia, and it told me that they have a much stronger alliance economically, militarily, and diplomatically, that Russia will go to bat for Sudan at the UN. And Russia has had plans the past few years to establish a formal military base in the nation of Sudan. And so those threads are there. And it's amazing that they could materialize into something concrete at any time and fulfill this prophecy given by Ezekiel 2,608 years ago. The next nation mentioned by Ezekiel 38 was Put. And this would be the region directly to the west of Egypt, which unquestionably would be Libya. This country, Put, it was mentioned previously in Ezekiel 27 and Ezekiel 30, talking about Put being an ally of Tyre, later Put being an ally of Egypt. And it was saying in those chapters that when Tyre and Egypt were going to be judged by God, Put was going to suffer as well. Put's story in Ezekiel, it just seems to be that it never picks a good country to get into bed with. Okay, Put is basically the Taylor Swift of world history. It just gets into one bad relationship after another. And so in modern times, Libya is a huge country as far as real estate goes, but it's a very weak country politically. It was plunged into a civil war just about 10 or 15 years ago, and it has not had a functional government ever since. Currently, Russia has been pulling for a leader named Khalifa Haftar to take control of that nation. Russia has also supplied weapons to Libya since 2008. And so once again, the pieces are in place to fulfill this prophecy given by Ezekiel 2,608 years ago. The last two nations that are mentioned in Gog's alliance are Gomer and Beth-Togarmah. Ezekiel 38:6 said, Gomer and all his hordes, Beth-Togarmah from the uttermost parts of the north with all his hordes. Many peoples are with you. I'm taking Gomer and Beth-Togarmah together because they're both actually part of the same nation today. Okay, first of all, these nations descended from Japheth, and so we're going back to Japheth's kids. I think, again, this relates to what I talked about last time. We go to that table of nations in Genesis 10, and it talks about where Noah's sons dispersed and what peoples came from them after the flood. In Genesis chapter 10, verses 2 and 3, it says, the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. So Gomer and Togarmah are both located actually in the region of Turkey today. Four of the people groups that are mentioned in this Ezekiel 38 prophecy, they're all located in the modern area of Turkey. Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Beth-Togarmah. A lot of people want to make Gomer into Germany, and that is understandable. It goes without saying, historically, Germany has had some issues with the Jewish people, okay? As I was looking into this, I don't see a lot of strong evidence that Gomer is talking about Germany. It is very possible Germany could want to get in on this fight. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up being part of it. It's possible, okay? So I'm not poo-pooing that. It's a definite possibility. Let me talk about why some people see it that way. Gomer is associated with an ancient people known as the Cimmerians, and the Cimmerians migrated in the direction of Germany. Now, if you look on a map, Germany is kind of a long way from Turkey. There's a lot of other countries that the Cimmerians settled in between Turkey and Germany. So I don't see the Cimmerian link very strong because the Cimmerians went to so many different places. I think it's just more concrete to just say, we know Turkey's a part of this thing. Okay, it could be talking about Germany. I know because the word Gomer looks like Germany. I understand why it's tempting to say that. Here's what I like to fall back on. I base a lot of my biblical understanding of this chapter from a Bible prophecy expert named Jimmy DeYoung. Jimmy DeYoung had a ministry in Israel for years. He traveled throughout the Middle East trying to understand the archaeological origins of a lot of prophecy and things that went on in the what we call Bible times. So he had this ministry in Israel for many years. Jimmy DeYoung died of COVID-19 around the time that I started this podcast, actually. But I did get to meet him in 2014, and I've just sure learned a lot from him over the years. So Jimmy DeYoung had an ancient map of Turkey, and his map was divided into 4 regions. Okay, this is what the ancient map said. It said Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Beth-Togarmah. And so, as I said in the intro, I don't have a time machine. So I'm really relying on a lot of ancient sources to tell me what these places are, to tell me where they're located. And that basically tells me the story, as far as I'm concerned. Here's a good hermeneutical principle for Bible interpretation. Always start by understanding what the words meant to the original audience. If you want to know what the Bible means today, you need to look at what it meant to the original hearers when it was first written 2,608 years ago. In closing today, I want to talk about some interesting factoids in relation to these Gog and Magog nations. Many are going to say that Russia doesn't fit with the rest of these nations because it's not a Muslim nation, but all of the other ones are. But here's something that I find quite interesting. Russia's military has a large Muslim portion. Some say 15 to 10%, others say 20 to 25%, and that number is expected to grow. Russia has a significant Muslim population. It borders a lot of Muslim countries, and Muslim citizens are represented in the Russian military beyond their proportion of the population. So they have a strong influence in Russia's military actions. My Daniel Block commentary, it's the new international commentary on the Old Testament, and it throws out the idea that it would have seemed extremely unlikely back when this was written 2,608 years ago that these African nations of Ethiopia and Libya would team up with Iran. It also says that Persia was such a non-entity at the time that Ezekiel was writing this, it would have been considered a fringe nation. Most Israelites might not have even known about it. And so it throws out the idea this might have just been some kind of ancient typo, the nations mentioned in verse 5. Or the way they put it, like scholars maybe added this later, or Bible writers added this later, that Ezekiel wouldn't have been thinking about these things. Those details really don't matter whenever we're talking about future prophecy, because the details come from God. It wasn't something Ezekiel was making up or predicting in his own head. Okay, this wasn't a prophecy Ezekiel was writing about his own day. So the likelihood back then of those nations teaming up, that doesn't matter. That's not relevant. Okay? In fact, that just makes it more amazing that Ezekiel would even claim that they would team up, because he was talking about something that would happen thousands of years later in the future. So I find it really interesting that Russia, if we're accurately interpreting Magog as referring to Russia and Gog as the entity influencing Russia's leader, then Russia is really the common thread that unites all of these nations to ally with each other. And it might sound a little random to see these African nations joining in the fight, teaming up with Russia. That's the part that always throws me for a loop, because I don't have any idea about what Russia's relationship is with random countries in Africa. But I saw this really fascinating article last year, is about 1 year ago at this time, and it was discussing the influence of Russia into Africa. And it mentions that Russia has been dumping billions of dollars into African nations and also forgiving some of their debts. And they're doing that because Russia has lost some of its friends over the past few years. They're kind of unpopular right now because of this war with Ukraine. And so Russia is looking for friends wherever they can find them. And the article was talking about how they were finding friends in Africa. Here's a sentence from a report on africacenter.org. It says, Russia has gained outsized influence in Africa in recent years by playing the cards it has well. Where it has realized the most influence, Libya, Central African Republic, Sudan, Madagascar, Mozambique, and Mali, Russia has agilely employed a combination of mercenary and disinformation interventions in support of isolated leaders or proxies. Then it says PBS and the Center for then I also found on PBS's website and on the Center for Foreign Relations, they were reporting on Russia's strong military presence, 1 in Libya and 2 in Sudan, in articles that were just from a year ago. And they don't mention Ethiopia a whole lot. So that could give us some indication of what Ezekiel 38 is talking about, which nations will align with Russia. I want to caution us, don't just read the Bible through a modern headline lens, okay? I'm not going to say I know that Cush is Sudan and not Ethiopia just because that's what the modern news headlines are telling me, okay? We shouldn't look at Bible prophecy that way. We shouldn't look at modern headlines and be like, oh, well, this proves that, this has got to be Cush right here. We need to look at, I think, primarily the ancient maps, the ancient works like the Septuagint, and try to understand what these words meant when they were written. Not go read the headlines and get carried away with the news and try to make Cush mean whatever we want it to mean today. But also, I don't think we should be dogmatic, okay? There's a lot of ambiguity in some of these things, like whether Magog is Russia, or whether it's Ukraine, or whether Cush is Sudan, or whether it's Ethiopia. Don't always assume that we just have it all figured out. But when we look at the headlines, it is interesting, okay? It sure seems likely that Russia could ally with or exert influence over Libya or some of these other African nations to team up with them and go after Israel. And so I think we've done some pretty good homework today to understand the where in Ezekiel 38. So as we wrap up today, what would cause Russia to even want to team up with these Muslim nations and go after Israel? Well, let's read verse 4 again. God said, "And I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws, and I will bring you out and all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor, a great host, all of them with buckler and shield, wielding swords." Kind of as we've established, the Muslim nations don't need a lot of motivation to go after Israel, okay? They don't even need a Klondike bar. All you need to do is ask them, and they'd be happy to do it for free. But what would Russia's motivation be in going after Israel in this epic end times battle? And could it relate to the current modern conflict that's taking place right now in Ukraine? We'll talk about that next time, so I hope that you'll be back. Make sure that you're subscribed. If you're not already subscribed, go hit that button right now, and you'll get that next episode whenever it comes out. Last week was the who. This week was the where. Next time, we're going to discuss why. Why are all these countries attempting to invade Israel? Then the week after that, we'll be discussing when. And we'll talk about all the theories of the timing of the Battle of Gog and Magog. These words were handed down from heaven a long time ago in a land far, far away. But you could see them play out in reality not so long from now in headlines and on TV screens, right in front of your eyes. Thanks for listening to this Cross References Bible study on the book of Ezekiel. This has been Luke Taylor, and I hope the Bible makes more sense to you after this episode.